So you're suggesting that we give him antibiotics. If he needs it, he completes the course. If he doesn't need it, he stops 2 days of antibiotics in his body. And so then I threw the question, okay, are you able to guarantee that there'll be no adverse effects of you giving a baby antibiotics that they subsequently might end up not needing? And they weren't willing to say that. So they weren't willing to say, actually, you know what we're trying will categorically not harm this child. And so to me, it was like, okay, so that means you know that there's a new introduction of risk with what you're suggesting. And so we declined. Our logic being, he's well. If he was not well, then probably we would have taken a different approach.
Big welcome to you, Deborah. Why don't you start by introducing yourself?
Thank you for being on. My name's Deborah. I am a secondary school maths teacher. This year, I had my first son, summer this year. I'm based in South London.
And just for the listeners and viewers, just do a disclaimer. I know Deborah from looking after her at my previous workplace. I was there to witness your birth, which you're going to explain and talk about your story. And then I think it was literally on my last day. You happened to have called in on my last day there, and they told you that, you know, I was leaving, and you guys like wonderfully came down, dropped me a gift and a card. It just kind of left me a note that, you know, can we keep in touch? Which it's been great sort of keeping in touch and seeing your journeys. That's kind of our backstory. But why don't you sort of like describe prior to pregnancy, who is Deborah?
Philosophical question right there. Prior to pregnancy, so I think my interests, like most people, have like changed over the years. I actually used to have a totally different career. I was in tax consulting for like 7 years, and then, like for many people, COVID just changed their perspective on their current job. So for me, COVID sort of took a lot of the glamour and the social aspect away from corporate life. And so I went from like the beginning of lockdown, it was so great working from home, you know, wake up, you'd be in your robe, you'd be at your desk. And then after a couple of years of that, without the social aspect of office life, it just really had me rethinking whether this was what I wanted to continue doing. And so at the time, I like asked loads of people around me, like, oh, if you didn't know what I already did for work, what would you think I did? And loads of people, well, there was a bit of a split. Some people were like, oh, I think you're a lawyer. Other people were like, oh, I think you're a teacher. And so this is like 2002, 2001. So like is common with many women, I think I was also starting to get broody. So fast forward, it led to the career change into teaching, which has been really interesting. I think it's been really good for my personal growth. I didn't go into teach. There's loads of different routes into teaching, but I chose the route that focuses on education inequality. So I don't know if you've heard of a charity called Teach First, but they basically, the idea is that good teachers tend to go to good schools and help kids who are already self-motivated. So then you've got a gap in, say, bad schools where you have maybe not so great teachers, and then those children perpetually have substandard education, and then, you know, it could cap their future prospects. So Teach First is all about placing good teachers in challenging schools. You're there for at least a couple of years. Some people stay in those fields. Some people maybe go somewhere a bit more simple. So I was placed in a school that I would describe as like really similar to Waterloo Road, if you ever watched it. Have you ever watched it?
No, I haven't, but I get the gist.
Waterloo Road is the only way for me to describe my school. So the kids are colorful, they're like outspoken, some of them have quite complex trauma. And so teaching at this kind of school has been really eye-opening. I didn't realize how sheltered I was. My background's been pretty vanilla compared to some of these stories. So I didn't expect the kids to. I knew I was there obviously to do a job and to influence them, but I didn't expect the influence on the way back. So it taught me a lot about the ways in which our prejudgments of people come out. These kids are really sensitive to any. They can tell basically whether you care or not. They can tell whether you're looking down on them. They get like so some of these subtleties that you might not know are within you, they come out, and then you're kind of forced to deal with it. So yeah, I've been teaching for 2 years, so I'm still pretty early on. It's just I had quite a crash course because Teach First has you immediately in the class. So yeah, so I'm happy with the career move. I've always wanted to be a mother. Teaching has been a nice prequel to motherhood. Put it like that.
It's really interesting to hear what you do as well. What you mentioned about the prejudgments, I guess you're having to confront that, and because we all make judgments, don't we?
Mm.
And judgments isn't always a bad thing either. You know, when you get a job, they judge you as correct for that position. We're all making judgments, whether subconsciously or not. So that's interesting having that experience and then going into your pregnancy. How was that journey for you?
So I my fiance and I unplanned unexpectedly got pregnant at the beginning of my second year teaching. So that was a real shocker for us, at least because we wanted to have gotten married first. But then also I was elated because at that point it became really obvious to me that for many of us, because I do have some friends who've had some fertility challenges, it only comes up sort of when you're trying or when you're ready. And so I was super grateful that okay, this isn't the timing that we expected, but wow, thank God that we can, and thank God it's actually been so easy. So it definitely took us by surprise. You know, we had to deal with telling family, and that wasn't always straightforward, but I was over the moon because I felt like I'd been craving motherhood for quite a while. Those closest to me knew as well. They're like, oh yeah, like Deborah can't wait to be a mum. And indeed, so it was like a dream come true, really.
Oh, that's amazing. And then how was your pregnancy itself? You know, was it quite straightforward? How was it?
Yeah, it really was. I didn't so the first trimester, I remember having morning sickness. I remember that queasy feeling. And at the time I think I had a lot of ginger tea, which helped quite a bit. But I was still able to go about my school day. I wasn't any less active. Um, I didn't have any unusual cravings. I was just eating everything. But yeah, I don't think there were any challenges with my pregnancy. My hair was like super thick, which I loved, which recently fell out. I thought I was gonna be exempt.
Oh,
My hair was like super thick. My skin was really radiant, and my fiance Michael was really good actually. That's when now that I'm looking back on it, I'm like, oh, that was such a pampered time. We'll do my breakfast, like I didn't do any housework. It was actually a really amazing time. The kids at school were super supportive as well. So especially as I got heavier, they were more conscious of like, oh, don't let Miss carry anything heavy. So the pregnancy itself was straightforward. The only challenge I had, which I heard is quite common, was like recurring thrush.
and so then going into like the days leading up to your labor and birth,
Mm.
talk about that.
Okay, so with the rush, the reason I mentioned that is because in one of my midwife appointments, when I was concerned about it, we did some swabs, and so it came up that I was a Group Strep B carrier, which I understand to be a bacteria on the skin that's pretty common and it can come and go. And so once they discovered this, they put like a little sticker on my folder to say that they would offer intravenous antibiotics when I go into labor. Okay. And so I think that came up quite early on. In subsequent appointments, I discussed with another midwife, because it wasn't always the same midwife I was seeing, exactly what is this group B, what's going on. And, I understand that it's not something that we routinely test for, but when it comes up, because it can cause complications, hence the offering of the antibiotics. So, I asked her back and forth about the probabilities, because I'm a numbers person, how often does it cause complications? When it does when it does cause complications, how often is the infant not responsive to medication? And, eventually we whittled it down, and it seemed super low risk for there to be complications that were not easily remedied by medication. So Michael and I discussed it, and we decided that actually we would prefer not to have the antibiotics. And also I had a few stories online of women with similar situations who had also decided not to go for the intervention. So that also gave me a bit of confidence. Okay, people do have a choice, and the language of the sticker was offer intravenous antibiotics. And I emphasize that because I, up until this, well, how should I put it? I guess every family has their own dynamic. I come from a family that's more, if the doctor says so, do it. So I think psychologically, it was only in pregnancy that I started to learn that, okay, you know, people decide to accept or decline things. So I worked almost to the end. I worked till about 38 weeks. So I had a couple of weeks until my due date. I'd always heard that firstborn come late, so I thought I'd have maybe like 3 weeks, 3 weeks and some change. So my due date was a Friday, and then it was Wednesday morning. I felt uncomfortable. I almost felt like I was having like a mild cramping, and something told me that, oh, okay, this is the beginnings of your contractions. So I still went to go wash my car that day, because the plan for those 2 weeks was to do as much as possible, because certain things obviously won't be possible when the little one's yet, like washing the car and filling it out. So I did my errands for the day. Towards early evening is when it started to ramp up. And I don't know what I imagined contractions to feel like, but they I felt them intensely. So I called the midwife line. I think they asked me about the timing. They said the timing wasn't close enough. I should stay at home, which I tried to for another hour, but I could feel that I wasn't yet at the point of excruciating pain, but I felt like I would soon be there. So I asked my boss to like just make our way to the hospital. So we got there. Let's say it's been a few hours since my contraction started. Yeah, and they'd said that they would have sent me back home because I was still so early on, but because of the group strep B on my file, that they were going to keep us. So, so I don't know if I've gone further than your question. Am I?
No, no, this is fine. Carry on.
So they had us in a room. I remember lying on the really hard bed, and when I think she was quite a senior midwife, when she came back into the room, we let her know that, actually we choose not to take the antibiotics. And I remember she was quite puzzled. And she was like, oh, we, that means we can't have you on this ward. We're going to have to like send you somewhere else, because, the only reason you're on this ward is because of that. And so we're like, okay, that's fair enough. We're happy for you to send us to the other ward. So we thought that would be kind of the end of the conversation. But sorry, because it's all a bit,
Sorry, Deborah, what ward were you on initially?
it's,
Were you in triage? And then is
it
this
was,
when you initially come in and they check you and they
I
assess
believe,
you?
it was where we saw you when we came back to say hi. It was that floor.
Okay, so around okay, so triage.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think she was like, she's going to send us downstairs. So because it's all a bit patchy, because obviously I miss all of this
That's okay. That's
really
okay.
long. Um, I remember someone else coming in who seemed more senior to her. I remember her body language wasn't friendly. Her body language was slightly more intimidating. But, she questioned that, I've been told that you don't want to take the antibiotics. And I asked why, which is a fair question. Can't remember exactly what we said at the time, but essentially that our understanding is that with the actual values of the probability that, it's not a high risk, and so we'd rather not. Also, I don't know if I mentioned, Michael and I are Christians as well. So for us, for us, we it's not that we're against medical intervention. It's just that our whole trust is not within medicine, basically. If I to put it like that.
Mhm.
I I think I thought that view would be a little bit more respected, but as we continue to go back and forth, because people's facial expressions sort of give themselves away, it was coming across to me. I could be wrong, as if like basically some of these people just thought we were foolish. Fact, they have the right to their opinion. So I, anyway, so I'm in pain. They've accepted for now. I'm not going to stick the antibiotics, and they gave me something. I think it's similar to morphine. I just know that it was injected into my thigh. Is it Picotin?
Pethidine?
Ethidine? Yes. That was. Do I regret the fact? I mean, it did its job, but it did mean that I couldn't keep any food down for the next couple of days. So Michael went to get me Chinese. I had the Chinese, and then I threw it all up. So I didn't know that that was a side effect of that pain relief. So,
Did
so
they,
yeah,
sorry, with the pethidine, did they give you an antiemetic, something to stop you feeling sick? Do you remember that?
not that I remember. They may
Okay.
have. I just can't remember.
Mhm.
But that was the end of Friday. So Friday, not much progress in terms of my dilation, the back and forth about the antibiotics, throwing up dinner, and then just dozing. So Thursday was a was an unexpected day. So I did all the antenatal classes, and I honestly imagined my labor going like really smoothly. I think it's just maybe it's the naivety of me. I didn't anticipate that the whole of Thursday there would basically be no progress. So I was like stuck at 2 centimeters dilate. I had a different midwife on Thursday, and she encouraged me to like play around on the ball and go for walks, which I did. But the contractions were really strong. And since then, I understand it's because of the position of my son's head. So he was back to back. So every time I felt that contraction, I really felt it at the base of my spine. And so I just think psychologically, I just wasn't as prepared for that level of pain to continue for so long. Again, I had more of that pecadin. I don't know why I can't retain that word. Say pecadin.
Mhm, pethidine.
Michael was trying to get me different foods to stay down. None of my foods are staying down. So my energy is dwindling whilst obviously not making progress in the dilation. So, sorry, another thing I forgot to mention, my waters broke in a subtle way. So I think my waters broke on Wednesday, but it wasn't overly clear to me. One of the midwives actually questioned me. She was like, "How did you not know your waters broke?" And it's because it sort of trickled. So just to me, it was
Mhm.
non-distinct to any of the other moisture down there. So by Thursday evening, everyone was getting uncomfortable with the fact that technically my waters had broken on Wednesday. You're, I'm not, I'm not progressing in my labor, and obviously there's the antibiotics that I've rejected. So I think, um, so then they suggested to me the hormonal drip to induce the labor. And at this point, I'm fantasizing about epidural at this point. So I'm like, yes, because I know it also with the hormonal drip, and I just want this whole thing to be over. So I've agreed to it. And it was quite a long wait to get us to another floor for that. But we did eventually. So I got my epidural, I got the hormone drip. And so that would have been really early in the morning on Friday.
And just to ask, did you get the epidural before they started the hormone drip?
Yeah. Yeah.
Was that your request?
Yes. Yeah.
Yep. Okay.
Which was different to the plan. I had visions of gas and air, and that just all went out the window halfway through Thursday. So, yeah, I had the epidural, had the hormone drip, and then it must have been Friday morning that we met you then, because there would have been the handover maybe around 7 in the morning. Was it 8 in the morning?
Yeah, yeah. I remember taking you on at first my shift. You know, you were the first person I took on for that shift.
Yeah. Um, and I don't remember anyone coming to speak to us about the antibiotics with the person who was just before you. But certainly, I think once your shift had started, maybe the right doctors were around to come in again and talk to us about the antibiotics. I honestly don't know how many different people we spoke to about this because there's also like a post delivery side of it as well. But I was really grateful that Michael was there to like sort of ward them off. And Michael's the kind of person who does not have any, he's just a bit less polite. To him, he feels like, you've done it the polite way. This is where your politeness can become an issue. And he's just going to tell it to them abruptly. They would try to even like avoid encountering him and like maybe appeal to me as the nicer one, but we're one and the same. We just have different expressions of the same viewpoint. So the hormonal drip, and I can't remember what prompted us to check the dilation, but suddenly I was fully dilated. I remember that morning going quickly. I remember
Mm.
I think Michael had gone to get me a pastry or something. I had a bit of orange juice. We were sort of chilling, chit chatting. Something prompted checking how dilated I was, and then suddenly I was fully dilated. And I remember we weren't given long to push naturally. It felt like we were given maybe 30 minutes to push, and I believe it was because there were doctors observing outside the room. I think they maybe weren't happy with Samuel's heart rate, something like that. I can't quite remember what sped up that process. So in that 30 minutes, I feel like we tried maybe 2 or 3 positions. We wanted it to hurry up and pop out in that moment. And then I remember the atmosphere changing to more panicked. I remember that all the doctors coming in and reading out the disclaimer for cesarean and basically letting us know that because we're now Friday, again, how long the waters have been broken. I think Samuel was in some distress, that they now want to intervene. So they said that they would try forceps. If that's not working, cesarean. So that was like, I don't know if I quite have the words to express how spun I was by how much things were changing in that moment. And yeah, so we got rushed to the theater. I don't even, I didn't even, was Michael in scrubs? I don't know. Scrubs, to be honest.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And and I remember one of the disclaimers being about, oh, if I hemorrhage, that I'd consent to them removing my womb, which I'm sure is like a standard disclaimer, but in that moment, it was just super intense. So this is where things now become like an episode of Casualty as far as I'm concerned. It's like, so we move over to the theater. I feel like there were maybe like 15 to 20 people in that room. There were a lot of people in that room. I remember the anaesthetist talking to me, trying to crack jokes. Everything was just all a bit too fast. Um, I remember 2 main, I guess, surgeons. And Michael explained to me afterwards that they seem to have had two different approaches. So he got the impression that one of them was quite keen to move on to cesarean, and the other one was really trying to try out the forceps for longer. I I know that you asked Michael if he had any music that he wanted to play, and he was confused. Music? What do you mean music? And then, thank God, you took the initiative and decided to play some gospel music. I thought we didn't even have any idea that we would go into a theatre room, not to sort of have music and like that. All of that was just not a thought. So I didn't even have a standard, labor and delivery playlist. But yeah, so you played music, and I remember the way the atmosphere in that room shifted when the music was playing. I think it affected everyone in that room. Seriousness of all that's going on. There's no there's no dignity, I didn't have a single concern that my legs were hoisted up everyone in the room. Like it didn't even occur to me in my mind. Afterwards I was really well in that moment, we were all on one accord. So my legs are hoisted up. I cannot feel my legs, yet everyone is asking me to push. So I'm just using the sheer force of imagination to push, and I'm just pushing theoretically, and everyone's cheering to keep me going. So at least I know that, okay, I must be doing something, even though to me it feels like I'm not doing anything. Obviously, I've got anesthesia in my body. I'm also like woozy, and Michael's holding my hand, but he's also sort of like looking around the room and trying to make sense of what's going on as well. And I remember one of the women in the room, I'm not sure what her role was, she let me know that Michael was crying. And when she first said, I was thinking, did she misunderstand? Because Michael's not much of a crier. But afterwards, he explains that, it was the intensity of the moment. It was just us two. And yeah, that I'm glad I didn't really notice it at the time, because I do often rely on him to be the one who's like, no, we're going to get through it. But, that was a moment of vulnerability for him, which is, of course, allowed. But everyone's cheering for me to push. The worship is going on in the background. And eventually, Samuel popped out. And I remember when he was placed on my chest, I remember he was completely numb, so completely useless. They were just my one good hand that I was using to support him on my chest. And I remember people asking me, like, how do you feel to be there? And I I don't know what I expected to feel. I don't For me, I was completely, it's almost like I was outside of myself watching myself.
Yeah.
Like I was just stunned that he was finally here after all the daydreaming. And, so much has happened over those few days. So much has happened over the last 9 months, or, even when you look way beyond that, I couldn't believe that so much has happened for you to be here, and now you're here. So my response must have sounded strange to whoever was asking me how I felt. Uh, and I remember asking the time, so that I had the time of when, and yeah, everything else was a wash. But I was just it. I mean, you must hear this all the time, Rosemary, but they those moments, that moment when a child is coming into our world is such a. I think that moment I was just hyper aware of the creative nature of God. I was like stunned by it that day, and the weeks after, we stayed on that high. We were on such a high. It was amazing. And yeah, so after that, I know we were carted off to the sort of, I don't know what that room is, where they sort of put all the women who've just delivered. Okay. It was a really hot day. I remember it being super hot. And I don't remember doing much else other than just, I remember I fed him, I breastfed him. I remember how soon after somebody must have reported it. And that first feed was really smooth. It was like as in he latched on instinctively. So I thought actually this is how easy it would be. I didn't know that thereafter it's we almost forget how to latch and it's a new learning process. But yeah, so I'd say my overall my pregnancy was super smooth. My labor was more complicated than I expected. But in the end, Samuel came into this world in the same way that I did. I was forceps. I took about 3 days. He was forceps. He took about 3 days. And I I think in the end it was perfect. I think it gave us a nice little story to tell everybody, memorable for sure. Mm. 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 Yeah. Mm. Or yeah. Yeah. Yes, yes. Yep, yep. I do remember that. Sure. Yeah, I think the reason I'd say so is, for us, it was a testimony of faith for us. So it it really, I think it enriched my, I'd say mine specifically, because Michael's got a level of confidence with certain things. I think it's fair to say our cultural background comes into play. I've been through our school system, and obviously I'm part of our school system now. And I would say that there's good things about the school system, but I do think you are taught to be really obedient to 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 all medical professionals. Now, don't get me wrong. I believe that their advice was based sincerely on what they felt was the best approach. Okay, so I don't think they were being underhanded or strange in that way. Whereas Michael was born and raised in Nigeria, and he's had an unusual like schooling background, and so he is, I'd say, less indoctrinated in that way. He's a little bit more confident to say, actually, no, I don't want to. I'm not comfortable with this and to decide. So for me, the whole scenario was it. I think it shifted my perspective on, okay, no, there are situations where if you're not comfortable, you have the right to say no. And also we really choked us on that scenario and he came through for us. So that's why I'd say it was so beautiful for me. It's like they were an annoyance at the time. The ways in which we were being spoken to was irritating at times. But I think we Michael and I felt even more close in that moment because obviously we had to kind of rally together, and it was a strengthening of our faith. That makes sense. Mm, 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 mm. So actually, I wasn't even aware that his temperature was initially raised at birth. Um, so I had only had the information about his temperature being fine, what they got down. So when we were in the recovery place, um, someone came to explain that, because of when your water broke and because of the GBS, we would it's sort of standard for us to give him antibiotics. And then I think we said in 48 hours, they'll be able to determine whether or not he needed it, and then they would stop the antibiotic. And that just really sounded like strange to us. So we were like, sorry, hold on, let's be clear. Is there something wrong with the baby at the moment? He said no. So I said, so you're suggesting that we give him antibiotics. If he needs it, he completes the course. If he doesn't need it, he stops with 2 days of antibiotics in his body. And so then I threw the question, okay, are you able to guarantee that there'll be no adverse effects of you giving a baby antibiotics that they subsequently might end up not needing? And they weren't willing to say that. So they weren't willing to say, actually, do you know what we're trying will categorically not harm this child. And, and so to me, it was like, okay, so that means that there's a new introduction of risk with what you're suggesting. And so we declined. Our logic being, he's well. If he was not well, then probably would have taken a different approach. So I think this was another aspect as well. I felt like we were wholly misunderstood. They felt like we were entirely against medical intervention. And it's not so, it's more so that we're not as keen on some of the preventative approaches. So I think we're a bit more reactive, if that makes sense. Because I think trying to anticipate multiple issues that haven't reared their head yet, I just think this could create more complication, was my reasoning. And I also just felt like, oh, like this fresh baby who's just come into the world, who's gonna have to deal with like so many contaminants of earth. You just want to like start him off with like I, I just felt like it was just too fresh for all of that. So they had so many people come in. Sometimes I could tell that they were trying to use the Nigerian approach. Like I feel like they sent one specific woman. They're like, oh, they're Nigerian, you're Nigerian. Like, speak some sense into them. And she tried to catch me when Michael was dozing. Unfortunately for her, he woke up halfway through, and he was just like, "I've had this conversation. I'd like you to leave." She huffed away. Now, that particular woman, so most of the conversations we had, I remained sympathetic to their point of view. But there was that particular woman I felt was manipulative. And the reason I say that is because so we'd had the successful first feed. The second feed, I was on my own and like he was struggling to lap. So obviously I'm a first time mom. There's no midwives around. We're trying to figure it out. And it's also quite hot. And so he's not feeding and it's been a while. So when the woman came to try to talk us into taking the antibiotic, towards the end of the conversation, she asked how the baby is. And I was like, oh, like I'm struggling to like get him to feed or whatever. And then she said something sort of implying that he might not be feeding because he's sick. But there was a specific way she said it. And then she stormed off. And so for me, that immediately put panic in my heart. I was like, Michael, go and get her. He was like, what? I was like, go and get her. So she walked quite fast because she's annoyed with us. And it was good that she walked quite fast because as Michael tried to like go and get her to come back, because in that moment, I was thinking, maybe she's right. Maybe he's really sick. Maybe that's why he's not feeding. So as Michael tried to kind of rush after her, there was another midwife heading towards him. So he actually changed his plan and turned to the woman and said, oh, we need help. The baby's not feeding. So this other midwife came, taught me how to get the colostrum out and put it on the syringe, and she resolved that matter. So we were so close to actually yielding because in that moment she threw her words like an arrow and it just struck me
Mm,
in that
mm,
panic. And I think in that moment I would have just yielded and been like, oh, maybe something is wrong with the baby. And then, I don't know how that tangent would have gone down. God was with us every step of the way. We also believe that other woman coming in the other direction and which she helped us so much with the feeding. I don't think that was a coincidence. So when trying to get us to give Samuel the antibiotics for 2 days, and then if he needs it, continue. If he needs it, continue. If he doesn't, stop. The woman tried to compare it to wearing a seatbelt when you're driving. That sure, sometimes most of the time there's not an accident, but because sometimes there can be an accident, you should wear a seatbelt. When we all know that there's no adverse impact of wearing seatbelts, but we do know that there could be an adverse impact of giving a fresh newborn antibiotics that they don't need. I guess you could should say something like that. So yeah, it's we were aware of the murmurings about us on the ward. A baby doctor did come to us and asked us to stay an extra day to monitor Samuel, which I was fine to. I actually still needed a bit more help with breastfeeding. Um, but I definitely got a sense sometimes that perhaps some individuals wanted something to go wrong so that they could say, see, well, you don't follow the guidance. Shame on them. Nothing went wrong. When we went home and things have been well. And the most we're having to deal with is this cold, which he's still shouting and flailing and doing his usual activities. So yeah, it I didn't know labor and delivery department could be at. I can appreciate for you being on the inside and, I'm sure you've seen much similar things, sometimes better, sometimes worse. That must start you really.
Yeah, I mean, it's honestly that it's kind of it's a common feature of labor ward, and also just to go back to one of the points you mentioned, no, I don't think you were just against medicine full stop. I mean, you had an epidural, you had the hormone drip. Your issue was just giving preventatives for the sake of it when there's nothing, actually wrong. And there are some hospitals who will say, they will only give antibiotics if there is something wrong. So they won't just screen and treat all babies that whose mothers have GBS. They will obviously do observations. So in your case, essentially, they offered the 48-hour observations. It seems right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then if something is wrong, they would act on that, which I think makes more sense than just giving all babies antibiotics. I think sometimes we are a bit too reactive, and unfortunately, this is a very common scenario on labor wards where women aren't given enough time in the first place to begin with. And it's like, we need to get things going. You're stuck. Which, by the way, most women who rock up to hospital, yeah, they do get stuck because we're not designed to be watched and, surveyed and documented whilst we are laboring. It's a very intimate process. And it's very similar to when we are in the act of conceiving. It's a very intimate process. Are people watching you and charting, and like it's just weird. It's just as weird when women are being observed. So yes, it's she might get stuck. And somewhere I always say there's two things that normally happen when the body is stressed or when the body's not really comfortable. Is either the body's going to slow down and think, okay, this is not we're not in a safe environment. We're going to slow it down so we can preserve in case mum needs to run. So she's able to run and preserve her life. Or we are going to quickly eject this baby so that mum can, clean up her baby and be able to run to save her and her baby's life. Those are usually the two extremes that I see when a woman is under just extreme levels of stress in labor. But it was what I really loved. One of the things I really loved about your case was just seeing you stand, stick to your guns. I think you also had a very calm demeanor about you for the level and for the amount of people who kept coming in and wanting to talk to you. And I think, your face was very just kind of just poker face. You didn't show annoyance at any time. I definitely would not have. And I think this is maybe this is where you and Michael kind of balance each other out. Just
Yeah.
kind of get out.
Like,
But I loved it. I love when people just speak up. This is my dream as a midwife. I rather know where you stand than just, anything can go. And then afterwards it's, oh, but I didn't speak up and I wish I had done this. And this is where trauma comes from. It's the, I wish I had done. It's there's lots of, if only I'd known, if only I did this, if only I did that. Trauma is really linked to that. So I am glad that you were able to, in a way, redeem yourself by really standing to your guns. What would you say to, or what advice would you give to women who are in a similar position to you and really wondering how they're going to advocate for themselves during their labor and birth? What nuggets can you give them?
I'd say it's quite important to speak to your birth partner or partners beforehand on what the stance is. So I think it would be really hard for Michael and I if we didn't have a clear view before we went into the hospital, because of course it just adds an extra layer of stress and you can be confused. And so we had what we'd agreed on beforehand. So I'd say give that some thought, give that some conversation. If you need to do a bit of research, do so. If you need to ask, those who have given birth recently, do that. And then, I mean, for me, honestly, I can't separate the experience from my faith, So I just think, so my stance is going to be a Christian view, because our confidence wasn't in ourselves. Our confidence wasn't in the research or the numbers. Yeah, I'm a numbers person, but I'm hyper aware of the limitation of numbers. I've got a bit contradictory view going on. Um, there was a lot of prayer beforehand. There were people praying for us, and it's labor and delivery is such a vulnerable time where you're not in control. Um, the doctors aren't even fully in control. Um, only God is in control. So I'd say pray for the birth story you'd like. Think and discuss and agree beforehand what you do not want. And hopefully that combination together should give you the confidence to be able to stick to it. You, you have the right to say, "No, it's your body, your child." I know that the people speaking to you may seem more learned and more articulate, but it's you that will have to deal with the ramifications. I'd say that.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. And then kind of just talk a bit about how has the bonding experience been, your postpartum experience? What has helped you to do well, to sail through?
Bonding with Samuel has been easy because he's just adorable. He's so cute. His facial expressions have always been really strong, and now they're extra strong. He's only 4 months soon, so he's becoming assertive. Like he grabs my hair, grabs my shirt, and just screams out of excitement. So he's really extroverted. Believe it or not, Michael is the extroverted one between us. So he's much like his dad, which I suspected he would be in the movie. So the how has postpartum been? I think I've been really blessed that breastfeeding has been really easy. I didn't have any issues with my supply, and by the time I left the hospital, so it hasn't been all bad. I had some really helpful midwives who helped us with breastfeeding. So by the time we left, I felt super confident. So because I've been able to exclusively breastfeed, which is what I wanted, I think that's really helped with the bonding because I know that there's like oxytocin, these different hormones that are released. So that's helpful. Of course, I know that not everyone may want to breastfeed or can breastfeed. So I think putting that aside, we we play on his mat together. Samuel and I, because he was a summer baby, which is helpful for us, it was easy to go out for walks with him in his carrier when he was quite young. So I think at the moment, at the 4 month mark, is actually when my energy is dipping a bit. I
Mm.
think for everyone. So in the beginning, there's the adrenaline, everyone's around. For us, it was summertime. So it was easier to like be out and about and, right off of that. And now that it's actually getting darker and the visits are less, I'm having to make more of an effort to still make sure we get out and little ways to add variety to our week. So, for example, I've like the other week or the other month, I must have made banana bread like 5 times just to add a bit of like novelty to the week. Um, so that part I'm still sort of figuring out because school was hyper stimulating compared to the home. I have to keep reminding myself that he's not going to be the age for that long. And he's going to be like, mom. So I, I'm consciously still trying to savor the stillness of it, but also trying to figure out to still stimulate myself. So hopefully, once we've recovered from our cold, for example, I plan to get back in the gym. But fortunately, we've got a gym under our building. So I think those few hours a week where I just leave him with his dad and I'd have maybe just gym time just for myself, I think will be good. So yeah, I think I'm still figuring out. I won't pretend as if I have it figured.
Yeah, of course. It's a journey.
It is a journey, but I every so often I'm reminded, I'm like, oh yeah, like I'm someone's mom. Like it's so weird. I don't feel old enough to be someone's mom. But no, I don't. Yeah.
Oh, oh no, thank you. And before we wrap up, is there any sort of last anything you want to say, or otherwise we'll show?
Question actually for you.
Mm.
So when, because I mean, we're not quite ready for another one yet, but we will definitely want more. Love twins actually. I'm secret of that. Um, have you supported women with like home births, and what's that experience like?
Um, my experience of home births has been within the NHS,
Okay.
but since leaving, I'm heading more towards independent midwifery. So probably by the time you are ready,
Mm.
I will be attending births as an independent midwife. But at the moment, and even for the past couple of years, I've been supporting women during the antenatal phase. This is more privately, and the postpartum. So, for example, women who I had a client who she was booked for home birth with her home birth team, but because she had had a previous C-section, she was now deemed high risk. She was 40, she had previous preeclampsia, previous gestational diabetes. So, there's all these things that made her high risk. So, essentially, her aim with working with me was to keep all of that, at bay.
Yeah.
So, dealing with the diabetes and just making sure she was just straight and she was okay. And I mean, a lot of it was kind of over, how can I say, overhyped. She was well, she was a well woman, and we really focused on, keeping her healthy in that pregnancy and doing the best that she could. So yeah, I kind of saw her through the antenatal phase, made her like a remedy pack for the labor and birth. So things like that they would have naturally given, like the syntocin to help the placenta come out.
Okay.
I made her herbal tonic for that. At one point, her blood pressure rose really high, and they were suggesting offering a hospital transfer.
Yeah.
And she messaged me, and I said, I part of the package was magnesium supplements. I told her what dosage to take. I said, have them repeat your blood pressure in 30 minutes. And sure enough, it had come down. And, she was able to have her home birth. And so she was really pleased about that because she was, tinkering on hospital transfer. But even that though, even the having to take, magnesium, that's not naturally how, I would want to work, because we know blood pressure rises during labor. That's your body's gearing up to do something. Yes, everything's going to be raised. You're preparing to give birth. But for the sake of just her staying in her home environment and just knowing that if she got a hospital transfer, just everything we had talked about, everything we had planned for like the previous 10 months, like none of it would have happened in hospital. She wouldn't have got the birth that she wanted. So yeah, all that to say that I support women throughout the antenatal phase and postpartum, soon to be independent midwife at home.
I have so much respect.
Oh, oh, thank you.
Thank you for having me on. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Deborah, for sharing your story. It's been wonderful having you on. And yeah, please look after yourself and your family.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
I appreciate you for listening or watching. If you'd like to get in touch or have a story you'd like to share, I'd love to hear from you. You can reach us through our website, houseofrosemary.com, or on Instagram, House of Rosemary, where we share posts on herbs, periods, and pregnancy. Take care.